everyone. I am back here with Bill. Bill, tell us who you are and what you do.
Hi, I'm Bill Shea. I'm CEO of DCLI. DCLI is the largest chassis provider in the United States. We operate in both the marine space with 20 and 40-foot chassis and in the domestic space with 53-foot chassis. I've been in the industry a long time, had an opportunity to buy DCLI in conjunction with a couple of private equity firms about 12 years ago, and it's been a wild ride. Over the last 10 years.
Well, I mean, it's been a wild ride for everybody, right? We've had the pandemic in between, and I love to talk about chassis. So let's talk about chassis. What has it looked like through the pandemic? Where are we at now? And what does the future hold?
Well, you know, Sarah, it was, there's no getting around it. It was a very difficult time during the pandemic. And what you need to understand is, you know, what drove some of the disruptions in the supply chain.
Yeah.
You know, $3 trillion coming into the U.S. market, inability to go out and take trips and go to restaurants, et cetera. We became very consumer dependent and driving freight into the United States. So imports exploded. And the infrastructure really wasn't in place to handle it. And you got to think about it as chassis, that freight backed up at the warehouse, and then backed up into the port, then backed up all the way to China. And chassis were part of that disruption.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was a mess, but we're not really out of the woods yet either, right? Because there's still disruption after disruption. So where are we now?
I think we're a good way out of the woods. We anticipate disruption. But right now, the freight volumes are lower. And we're seeing sort of all the ports are cleared out. There's no ships waiting to anchor. We have slight disruptions in certain markets. But for us as a chassis supplier, the main issue is what we call street dwell. Normally, our street dwell was 5 days. During the pandemic, it went to 9 or 10 or longer.
Wow.
So that meant that we needed twice as many chassis to support our customer requirements.
Yeah.
We expected that that chassis dwell time would come down in fourth quarter of last year as we began to see a softening in the market, but it really hasn't, right? And so one of the concerns that we've got going forward is first half of the year is slow. Everybody expects that. If the second half of the year gets back to a pre-pandemic 2019 level, and dwell continues to rise or stay the same, we may be back in the same situation that we were.
That's not what everybody wants to hear. So tell us, get your crystal ball out for me and talk to me a little bit about what the future will hold then.
Okay.
Hopefully it's going to clear up, right?
Tell
us it's going to clear up.
It will clear up. I think one of the keys, right, is we need to understand that the intermodal industry is interdependent, right? So there are minimum of seven players, companies in any single move, right? So if you have disruption at one level of the supply chain, it's going to carry through. I think we're doing, as an industry, I think we're more aware, and the single biggest thing is communication. So over the last 2 years, we've been working with the Department of Transportation and other agencies, and we have now, it started off as 3 times a week, then once a week, now it's every other week. We're bringing over 60 different companies, ports, railroads, the ocean carriers, the chassis providers, BCOs, where we have the supply chain disruption meetings, and we talk about what's going on in the market. So I think that communication is a big part of it. One of the things that we see is that from a chassis perspective, we're a little bit unique. We see a change in how chassis are provided. Back in 2010, ocean carriers provided all the chassis for their customers. Right in 2012, we started DCLI. We carved out from Maersk, and it became what we call a trucker model, where we provided chassis both to the ocean carriers and to the truckers. So over the last 5 to 10 years, a number of different chassis provisioning models have started. IEPs like DCLI, Track, and Flexi, and others have developed their own proprietary pools specifically for ocean carriers, motor carriers, or BCOs. Right. In addition, right, we've got a pool product like CCM that's operating in the Southeast. In the West Coast, we have Pool of Pools. Pool of Pools was started in 2015. I convinced two of my competitors to join with DCLI to create an interoperable pool in the San Pedro Bay complex. Right, it was really driven off a model that I created for the U.S. rail system back in 1994, and it's operated well. But one of the single biggest changes in the market is what's happening with net leases of chassis by truckers.
Okay.
Right, in the old days, 2010, right, most containers facilities at marine facilities were predominantly wheeled, and railroads were about 95% wheeled. Over the last 10 years, marine terminals are less than 20% wheeled. They're 80% grounded. In the rails, about 70 to 75% are wheeled, but 30% are grounded. When you have a grounded facility, a trucker can get a live lift of a chassis. Right? They can keep control over their chassis, and they don't have to run what's called a drop and hook operation, where they would leave their chassis on a terminal, lose control. I was on JB Hunt's board. You would never do that if you were a trucker. All right? So now with live lifts and with at grounded facilities, we've seen a major push for especially large truckers to go out and net lease their own equipment. In 2010, there possibly were 40 to 50,000 trucker owned or leased assets. Today, it's over 200,000.
Wow.
Right? 10% of the freight was moved by trucker-owned wheels in 2010. Now it's 40%. So that market dynamic has changed. And I think what we try to talk to our shippers is that they should look to develop a portfolio strategy.
Okay.
They should encumber their motor carriers, should go out and acquire some chassis for them. They can net lease directly. They can operate in our pools. So they've got much more flexibility in how they meet their chassis requirements today than they did just 10 short years ago.
Yeah, and options, right? I mean, when we're thinking about supply chain strategies, we want to have flexibility, we want to have options, we want to know what that looks like in all aspects of the supply chain, right? Because chassis are only really one aspect of what a supply chain professional is looking at when they're looking at their strategies.
Sure.
But it's a very important one.
Right.
And so, knowing where the market has been, knowing where it's going, and the capacity and what that looks like and how it's grown is really valuable information to the supply chain logistics audience so that they can think strategically about their strategies.
Right. You think about it. I was on a panel many years ago with a vice president of marketing of Norfolk Southern, and somebody asked whether or not chassis were really important to the supply chain. And Mike McCollum, he had a great sense of humor. He said, I think so. He said, we tried to move a container down the highway without a set of wheels, and we could only get it to 2 miles per hour.
We have a problem.
Right. So at the end of the day, it's a key component. But again, it's the interdependency.
It is.
The interdependency between the liner companies, the BCOs, the port operators, the terminal operators, the chassis providers, the drayage companies, the warehousing companies. All of that has to be coordinated. And that's why we're looking to build models that have a platform that integrates our chassis provisioning model into each of our stakeholder partners.
Yeah, because collaboration is the future of business. Now, let me ask you, what's your favorite thing about being at TPM?
Well, it was really funny. Peter kicked off TPM, and he talked about 10,000 meetings were going to be held. And based on the number of people here, he missed the mark. But what he didn't add was the number of meetings that will occur after TPM that were set up at this meeting. So if Peter said 10,000, we think he missed it by at least a factor of 10. There'll be 100,000 meetings. This has become the central forum that all stakeholders can get together, talk about their issues, talk about their individual customer relationships. A big push on technology. I've been chairman of Bloom Global's board for a number of years. The number of technology players that are here today talking about solutions on tracking, visibility, and logistics execution, that has been one of the biggest change. And you actually now have a TPM Tech that you had the previous week. So this is really our chance to spend time with our customers, our key stakeholder partners, whether they're railroads or ocean carriers or motor carriers. But it's become part of our fabric.
Bill, you are so passionate, and I love it. Thank you so much for coming on TPM TV and sharing your insights with us today. Thanks, Bill.
It's a pleasure. Be well.